This webinar series is organized by the Center for Studies on Economics and Development of the National University of San Martin and several groups of YSI. In today's session, we'll try to understand some patterns of adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies, in particularly in the cases of Mexico and Argentina. I will present briefly the speakers. Marcela Amaro Rosales, like I said before, is a researcher at the Institute of Social Research and Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. She's an economist. She has a master's degree in economics and innovation management and a PhD in social sciences. She's coordinator of the seminar on interdisciplinary studies on science, technology, and innovation, and the seminar on economics and management of science and technology. Her research topics are emerging sectors, in particular biotechnology, technology transfer and learning, inclusive innovation, and institutions and public policies on science, technology, and innovation. She's a member also of the National System of Researchers of the National Council of Science and Technology in Mexico. Hernán Morero has a PhD in economics from the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba. He's an assistant researcher at Centro de Investigaciones y Estudios sobre Cultura y Sociedad from CONICET, which is the National Research Council from Argentina, and Universidad Nacional de Córdoba, where he studies innovation complementarities in the software sector from Argentina. He's also an assistant professor of industrial economics and history of economic thought in the Faculty of Economics from Universidad Nacional de Córdoba. He's also a member of LALIX Scientific Committee and editor of Pymes Innovación y Desarrollo Review, which is the main publication of Red Pymes Mercosur Network. His research interests include innovation and learning processes at firm level in diverse industries and industrial policy and technological strategy for developing economies. Okay, I have to admit more people to the webinar, and then, like I said before, in terms of the organization of this webinar, the speakers will have up to 25 minutes each for their presentations, and after that they will respond to questions from the audience. In this sense, I would like to ask people to preferably write the questions in the chat, since this let more people to participate. But in case you need, you can request the floor by the chat also. And well, Marcela, if you want to start, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me share the presentation. It's okay? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Darío. Hello, everyone. First, I would like to thank Darío, Florencia, and Lorenzo for inviting me to participate today in the webinar. And I would like to comment some things to introduce the presentation. First one, I think the presentation seeks to be a provocation for us to discuss the implication that Industry 4.0 has and can have for developing countries. And it is a provocation because in an important part of our literature, I have observed that there is an optimistic vision of what Industry 4.0 can mean. But also, I agree with the potentials that technological development can have for productive transformations, but technology can also mean opening up existing gaps or open other different gaps between the developed countries and developing countries. So I was thinking about how can I start my presentation. And well, the proposal by Darío was to speak about the patterns of adoption of Industry 4.0. And when I think about the Mexican case, I think we have problems, very particular problems that maybe we sharing with other countries in Latin America, especially, about the barriers to use and introduce the Industry 4.0. So my reflections and the presentation is about the barriers about the Industry 4.0. Well, this is the, let me move the, okay. Well, this is the exposition plan today. First one, I will talk about the distinctive elements of Industry 4.0. What does Industry 4.0 change? The fast international overview, the projections for developing countries, the barriers for developing countries, and the Mexican case, and some preliminary conclusions will with the for open the discussion. Well, distinctive elements of Industry 4.0. The emergence of a new technological revolution called Industry 4.0, which consists of the combination of advanced production and operation techniques with exponential technologies, has been proposed by different international organizations. We can consider as a model first applied in Germany and then adopted by the entire European Union, will usually in United States, and this process was called advanced manufacturing. Robotics, artificial intelligence, cognitive technologies, nanotechnology, biotechnology, the Internet of Things, Internet of blockchains, and data science have been considered as technologies that together represent opportunities to radically modify productive systems. The emergence of these technologies represents a qualitative and quantitative change, as they can have a high impact on various business and industrial agents and structures. I think the Industry 4.0 is a highly integrated smart factory in which individual goods are produced sustainable in a mass production manner to fulfill customers' demands in a global competition. This concept, born in Germany, and which seeks to explain the trend of technological innovation, which emerged in 2008 crisis and was replicated by several industries in European countries. According to the World Economic Forum, Industry 4.0 is characterized by a fusion of emerging technologies in a number of diverse fields, such as the technology that I mentioned. And this new digital paradigm is the center of the disruptive change, characterized by their speed, extent, the impact on society, and the process involved the connection of physical and digital technologies through the value chain with the aim of transforming production and the supply of services. This approach is centered on the fusion of different technologies. And let me show you this image. Well, this is one of the, one of the technologies implicated in the Industry 4.0, but maybe we can add it to the blockchain. And I like this definition about the Industry 4.0, like a process of socio-technical change that affects the physical, digital, and biological domains based on the innovative and effective exploitation of a wide range of new and emerging prevalent digital technologies through their diffusion and interactions. Because I think it's very important that if we consider to new revolution, technological revolution, we never have to forget it that they implies a lot of socio-technical change, because they need institutional infrastructure, they need a cultural change. So it's very important, especially for developing countries, because we have a reality very particular about the use and improve the technologies and different technologies. let me this. Okay, so but if we think about the digital technologies, maybe in the early 80s, almost of the technologies involved in the Industry 4.0 are exist in the world. What happened? What's the difference? No, in Industry 4.0, what's the difference with the process to digitalization previous in the in the world? So I think this is a process that the recent trends of industrial development is based on the increasing digitization of production processes, no, which is based on the deployment of robotics, blah, blah, blah. But the most important is the process about the interconnection, combination, and communication between devices. This is very important because maybe when we analyze the countries in the developing countries, usually we can find the technologies, but the technology is separated, no? Not in this process to between different devices, the communication and the integrated system to consider the Industry 4.0. What I mean about that? In the 80s, usually we can see in the factories this kind of organization, the island, technological islands, no? And the names refers about we have different areas to production with engineering design, architectural design, materials, components, different spaces, but the spaces are not communicate between different devices. The qualitative and quantitative change is about the integration. And well, now we have different technologies to permit this integration specifically, like the Ethernet, the internet, the connection in the cloud computing and the artificial intelligence. Yes, we have new technologies and we have other capabilities technologies, no, around the communication between these devices. So what does Industry 4.0 change? The change depends very much on the industry or sector of application and use of Industry 4.0. In some of them, some change will matter more than others, and certain actors or process will be involved. This integration, aggregation of technologies implies different change. I made this list: technological change, organizational change, new worker skills, the demand of new worker skills, new institutional arrangements, societal change, environmental sustainability, and different collaboration networks, and yes, changes about the global value chains. But what happened with this change in the world? When I decided to, I did a literature review to trace the origin of the term Industry 4.0, I realized that is this concept and somehow still in a dispute with other terms. And in the table, you can see different concepts that refer the same process, but I would like in a few points. For example, maybe the more knowing concept is Industry 4.0, no, it's from Germany, but in USA, we can start the other concept like smart manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and South Korea, manufacturing 3.0, in China, made in China 2025, and Internet Plus, and super smart society. So I think this phenomenon occurs in different parts of the world, but especially you can see what kind of countries, no? And this is important because in developing countries, we have the problem that sometimes we want to replicate the process in developed countries. And what happened with our societies, technologies. So I think I don't think, the Industry 4.0 agenda emerged from developing countries, especially in Germany and the United States, have implemented and designed public and private agendas to promote a digital ecosystems that integrate firms, suppliers, consumers, customers, and a digital culture that allowed its consolidation. By the nature of Industry 4.0, it has been deployed primarily in manufacturing. Industries such as automotive and aerospace are examples of this, but we can find in other sectors applications to Industry 4.0, like in agribusiness or services, for example, in the college Agriculture 4.0 and Logistic 4.0. So, what are the projections for developing countries? I want to start with saying that, in my opinion, it's not correct to speak in general of developing countries because we have a lot of difference. But in an effort to find general traits, I will start from the hypothesis that we share characteristics and weakness around this topic. Perhaps we can start by asking ourselves some questions, which does not mean that I have the answers, but I just do so that the one can start thinking about the discussion at the end. For example, what are the implications for Industry 4.0 for developing countries? It is possible that there could be shocks in the labor markets. What is the relationship between the adoption of new technologies and productivity? And we can divide it, the questions in three levels, no? In macro level, in meso level, and micro. Maybe in a macro level, the worry is about the institutional structure, no? If we have an institutional structure that allows countries to make technological transitions, in a meso level, if the industries can transform themselves technological and organizationally. In a micro level, if the workers have capabilities and skills to adapt and respond to the new labor demands. So we have more questions than answers, but this is the invitation for today is to discuss together these points. Specifically in the labor and employment, the discussions in developing countries has focused on the risk, especially for employment and the type of work that is and could be demanded in the future. You can find different methodologies to analyze the possibilities to lose jobs, and this is a very famous study from Frey and Osborne, where they analyzed 702 occupations and conclude that 47% of US jobs will disappear in coming years. Yes, this I think this is a very alarmistic result, but well, we can discuss. And in other methodology from Ernst, Gregory, and Syrah, propose their analysis in terms of jobs and tasks. They differentiate between routine and non-routine tasks and analyze tasks proposed to automation. The results show that in the OECD members countries, only 9% of jobs could be automated. I think this methodology is very interesting because we can divide, no? Because you have different kinds of activities that compose a job, no? So maybe in the job, some parts of the activities, they can be automation or digitalization or use robots, but not the complete part of the activities labors. So I think it's a good idea if we can divide it, no, because because maybe there is a reconfiguration of the kind of type of skills that are in demand, and they may so involve an internal reorganization of firms. So when I review the literature, I came across a number of studies that have analyzed the barriers to Industry 4.0 implementation in developing countries. It's very interesting because not only for Latin America, we sharing the same barriers, no, in all the developing countries. So I made this table, no, with the central and key barriers to different studies, and it's well, maybe I don't remember exactly. Some there are 20 or 25 barriers, and in different degrees for the countries and sectors and industries, and we can see the principal barriers: high investment in Industry 4.0 implementation, lack of clarity regarding the economic benefit, challenge in value chain integration, risk of security breach, the low maturity level of the desired technology, inequality, disruption to existing jobs, lack of standards, regulation, and forms of certifications, lack of infrastructure, lack of digital skills, challenges in ensuring data quality, lack of internal digital culture and training, resistance to change, ineffective change management, and lack of digital strategy alongside resource scarcity. With this taxonomy or barriers to identify, I tried to analyze about the Mexican case. And for this case, I made a review the most recent studies that have been carried out on the Industry 4.0. I divided the studies trying to identify the positive aspects about the Industry 4.0 in the industry, specifically in two industries in Mexico, the automotive and aerospace sectors, because, well, maybe are the most important sectors for Industry 4.0, especially in Mexico, because we have a lot of connections with the global value chains. So it was very interesting. And I found this positive aspect, sorry. We can improve productivity, innovative products or services, to have answers in shorter times, creation of intelligence networks, achieving productive and environmental sustainability, cost reduction, increased productivity and efficiency, increased control of machines, tools, and people. In the case of the automotive sector, we will have cleaner vehicles, guarantee safety, performance, and power, more environmental friendly technologies, reducing costs, etc., etc. But let me share in the negative aspect. Well, job losses. The Industry 4.0 is an approach assumed to be purely theoretical based on expectations and possibilities, the magnitude of social costs and the feasibility of business strategies. And I take some conclusions about other studies, and in that studies, let me talk about the given the characteristics of Industry 4.0 in Mexico studies. And for example, in the case of BMW in San Luis Potosí, the industrial robots arms are used to avoid strenuous tasks. This is very important because in the different interviews that I realized with partners in other industries, especially in the firms, they are worried about the strenuous or dangerous tasks or jobs. So they prefer to use robots or other kind of technology in this kind of jobs, no, or activities. So, but not in all the activities, only in these specific kinds. A welding robot, for example, in Mexico is cheaper now than the cost of labor in manufacturing. But this is important because only one kind of robots, not the robots. No, because in other conclusions, in other studies, and in the interviews that I made in the last year, I found that the most of the firms prefer the labor because it's cheaper than the technology. No, so we have a very important process by connection with US, because we have the TMEC, the treatment to commercial arrangements. So, but in that cases, in the automotive and aerospace sectors, is more important the cost of labor. No, the decision between technology or workers is workers. In this moment, I don't know if maybe in the future the technology was most cheaper than in this moment. Sorry. According to, let me move that. To McKinsey, Mexico is the 7th country in the world with the highest percentage of jobs and risk of being replaced by machines in automotive sector, but it's only an estimate. In the aerospace industry, the skills of the professional workers in assembly primarily remain the fundamental elements of the work process that rather than automation. Automation has created other types of jobs, and in Mexico, the numbers of automotive robots increased from 121 per 10,000 employees to 530 in 25. Now, this is important. Not everything is automatable, and jobs contain a significant ingredient of tacit knowledge. And this is maybe an obvious conclusion, but in different studies in Mexico, this is a highlight continues. In technological terms, the automotive industry use of collaborative robots, this special technology, the name cobots, that integrate systems, modeling and simulation and big data has been promoted. Some automotive clusters have created training and technology development centers for design and simulation, and other engineering and technology R&D centers.
Marcela,
in addition to
approximately 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. And well, let us remember that the automotive industry in Mexico is divided in the assemblers and the small and medium-sized suppliers. So this is important because we have two kind of firms in Mexico, especially in the automotive industries, no, and only the assembles or the big companies use this kind of technologies, no the small and medium suppliers. I have a, okay, well, let me talk about this one because I think it's important. In this part, we can see, I share results from Casaleta and Estesano, it's very recent study, and they made a survey in aerospace sector in Mexico, and they found that the principal technologies in Industry 4.0 in the aerospace sectors, that the virtualization, no, is the first one, but in how the people is training about the Industry 4.0, and the people is in the college, is very singular, no? The way to training about the Industry 4.0, and in the barriers to develop to the digitalization in the firms, the problem is lack of infrastructure. So we have a problem with the infrastructure, but other important problem is with lack of training. And this is other important problem because in the different studies, they consider the educational and training and areas, specific areas related with Industry 4.0, we have scarcity. Let me show. So, with a literature review and with other interviews that I made with other partners, we think we have barriers and risks in Mexico about the Industry 4.0. Yes, we have opportunities, but maybe in my presentation was a very negative vision about the Industry 4.0. But in this part, we have two points important. First, the lack of job skills in one Industry 4.0 technologies. We have very important problems with the regulations associated with the TEMEC. There are no technical profiles that can supply the possible demand, lack of adaptation to the new business models, weakness of the innovation system, frequent change in public policies and innovation programs, lack of infrastructure, lack of public and private financing, low level of connectivity in sub-regions, permanence of low wage and low productivity. And this is very important, and I think it's a very particular conclusion for Mexico, because we have a big problems with insecurity and violence, especially in the north of Mexico and in the frontier with USA. And this is very important because it's in the manufacturing activities are concentrated in the frontier. But in the frontier, we have a big problems with the narco traffic, violence. So this is an important barrier to implement and adopt Industry 4.0, because are a lot of engineers and PhD people, they don't want to move to the frontier because it's a place too insecure. So we have a special activities in that part, but unfortunately is the frontier with Mexico. But the north of Mexico is a more industrialized part of the country, no? Because at the south we have more agricultural activities and traditional activities, but it's very important in the studies, no? In the recent studies. So we have only two important barriers associated to the work and technology. No, we have traditional work schemes, low development of digital skills, individualization of the workers and cheap labor force. And in technology, we need digital strategies, Not all processes can be automated. The rigidity in supply chains is a very problem, and the cost to acquire technology. So I only want to say this one. For developing countries, we require a real effort from governments to promote the development and use the technology related to Industry 4.0. What's mean? The industrial policy, I think. So it's the moment to start to discuss again about what happened and which mean industrial policy. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcela, for your presentation. It was very interesting. And I would like to pass the floor to Hernan. And after that, we can start with the questions.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Thanks a lot to YSI and the IDAES team for the invitation of this session. I really enjoyed the presentation of Marcela. I happily realized that we are in the skeptical session of Industry 4.0. What I will present, it is a kind of English version, a modified version, I could say a 2.0 version of a speech that I gave in Rosario as a part of a panel in the Red Pymes Congress in 2019. Call it Industry 4.0 technological changes for Latin American development. That lecture speech comes from some learnings that began with a research that we performed in 2018 with other colleagues as Jorge Mota, Rubén Azcúa from Universidad Nacional de Rafaela, and Marcos Dini and Nicolo Giglo from CEPAL. No? Well, you can see here some information of this original study and background. The report was published in 2019. Here you can see the link for the document. Of course, this document, it is in Spanish. Well, it was a joint research with UNRAF, CEPAL, and our university, Universidad Nacional de Córdoba, for the Europymes program from CEPAL and the European Union that tried to study about the impact of Industry 4.0 on manufacturing micro, small, and medium firms in some Latin American countries. There you can see a paper that compares the results from Argentina and Brazil from Rubén Azcúa. Specifically was about Argentina. We wanted to explore motivations, benefits, and obstacles that actual Argentinian industrial micro, small, and medium firms faced in the adoption of 4.0 technologies. You know, well, what is Industry 4.0? Already knows. What can I add? This webinar had his past session about it with two excellent presentations, just to say that actually it's used to refer to the latest evolution digital technologies applied to manufacturing, no? But in the beginning, the term it was more as a marketing brand to sell machinery presented in the Hanover Messe Trade Fair. Afterwards, German government introduced the term as a background for its industrial policy making. Well, our study was qualitative. The focus or study was firms that already have implemented some of these new digital technologies, and we inquired them about this implementation, what were their motivations, what benefits they had, what were their obstacles, and how they faced these limitations. No? Well, here you can see some of the sectors of the cases that we identified, their sizes, and its antiquity. Just an illustration, you can see, for example, that there were cases from the automotive sector, from the food and beverage, electronic, plastic, different kind of production of capital goods, from the optical industry, as an example. And there, in these cases, there were several implementations, as for example, implementation of Internet of Things, real-time production data capture software, some cases that implemented software embedded of artificial intelligence, different application of advanced robotic to the storage, production, and quality area, software with that applies big data analytics, some cases that implemented cloud computing, and in the case of 3D printing, an implementation of prototyping of part for products development. There you can see some of the results of the study. The results were focused on the limitation that these small firms actually faced in the adoption process. We can mention, for example, the lack of knowledge of these technologies, that was engaged mainly by suppliers' assistance and informal and formal information from fairs. The lack of digital internal competence was a central obstacle in these cases. Other obstacles include culture and resistance to change, and financial access and the size of investment. Some of the technologies included in the Industry 4.0 technologies could be cheap, as the installation of sensors. Others are not so cheap, like robotics, of even in industrial 3D printing. Well, between the other barriers or obstacles, it is the connectivity infrastructure limitations there, and the characteristic of the offer of 4.0 technologies in our country were also important limitation. But what all this could significate for potential risks in the Latin American development, or what are the risks we are facing? The next word are some thoughts and insights that began with their separate report, but collects other personal reflections and consideration presented elsewhere in other documents, as you can see here, and others presented nowhere. Well, let me say that one of or major challenges is how small and medium firms will be affected by this process of expansion of digitalization. The reason why is the very high share in our production and employment structure. It is I know it is a kind of stylized fact pointed out by heterodox economics, but here you can see some data from a CEPAL study of 2018 about it. Here is the share in employment and sales, but adding, let me say, that micro, small and medium enterprise in Latin America concentrates about 25% of production, more than 61 of employment, and close on 90% of the firms in the European Union. The European micro, small, and medium firms, it represents 67 of value added and close to 70% of employment. If you focus only on micro firms, Latin American micro firms are the 88% of formal firms, represent the 27% of employment and only the 3% of production. While European microfirms are the 90% of firms, 30% of employment, but 24% of production. So production heterogeneity is much bigger in our region. You know? Well, a lateral issue if we are present, if we are in a present of a fourth revolution, or fourth industrial revolution, or even if we are in a present of a industrial revolution of at all. I don't really want to enter on this debate. You can see this excellent paper that deals with this issue from Christian Brixner, Joguel Suarez, and others, published in the Economics of Innovation and New Technology journal. But I just want to say that it is not persuasive at all for me that we are seeing a new and a particular industrial revolution. Really, it seems that we are seeing an identification of the key features of the information and technology and communication technology paradigm to the production. Well, you heard some things about the Industry 4.0, of the characteristics of the smart factory, and you heard things like it allows flexible production. That's not really new. Any case, we're really in a presence of an open story. You know, in the one hand, as I said, we're in a presence of an open story. And in the other hand, the expansion of the digitalization process, it is a fact. So even if we are facing a new reality, or if we're facing an identification of past features or characteristics of the technological paradigm of information and communication, there are risks for development. But let me say, if the wide adoption of these new digital technologies effectively becomes a competitive and market survival imperative, it is very worrying for the Latin American development process. And it is related to what I said, that production heterogeneity could be rising, and also the inequalities involved in this production structure heterogeneity. One of the results of our study was that one of the critical factors for the adoption of these new technologies was the existence of previous strong initial digital competencies in the firms. That's the reason why the expansion of this digitalization process could raise the productivity gaps between the firms that have previous digital competence and those that don't have it. No? So we already had inequalities. We are adding or facing an additional factor of inequality. The production inequalities in Latin America are actually very important, and the problem of the structural heterogeneity is a very disturbing limitation to our development process. Okay, so we have to anticipate this problem in the policy making to have a selective interventions mechanism to prevent further difficulties. Other risk that some of this was mentioned by Marcela. Evidence showed, for example, in Europe, that mostly are the large manufacturing firms that are in the process of implementing Industry 4.0 technologies. She said, like the automakers or the assemblers in the automotive industry. And also the productivity profitability of this implementation in the bigger firms, in the larger firms, crucially relies, especially their profitability, upon that their own suppliers adopt similar standards that accede to integrate their production and information system with the larger firms. No, due to the interdependence that large manufacturers and their small and medium firm supply chains, there is a need for the larger firms that those suppliers, small and medium firms, to follow them, switching and adopting those advanced manufacturing technologies and modify their ways of working. Those small and medium firms will have to adapt to the new standards and methods in the sector in order to remain competitive and to remain linked into the existing value chains and production network. Well, Latin American manufacturing small and medium firms historically has suffered the power inequalities in the chain values between the large firms, for example, the automakers, and their local suppliers in the value chain. No, if the automaker, for example, taking for example the automotive sector, needs that their suppliers adopt their own standard and to integrate their system with the local supplier, who is going to pay the cost of this incorporation of the new technologies and the organizational chains that should make the suppliers. No? This is a potential focus of conflict between foreign subsidiaries and local suppliers that sectoral regulation must be aware to take into account in policy making. There are also others uncertainties, for example, who owns the data. There are no agrees or standard of who are able to exploit the enormous volume of information and data generated by machines, by the products, the translation and computer system of the firm. Who owns this data and who could exploit the firm that use the machine, the machinery supplier, the software developer are the cores of the value chains, where the firm suppliers, all of them in a kind of integrated virtual space. Any case, it is an issue that will need the definition and negotiation and the establishment of agreement and protocols to establish who's available to exploit the data. The other thing is how much 4.0 we in developing countries really need. The idea of a smart factory appears by the moment as a story far away from the immense majority of industrial micro, small, and medium firms from Argentina. The manufacturing small and medium firms with an integral adoption of these kind of technologies seem to be an empty set, really. Here is some data that illustrate the fact. Just let me say that from this study, it was not identified in the case of Argentina. Many firms that implemented this kind of technologies in more than 3 areas, organizational and functional areas. None firm of the sample of this study was identified as completely 4.0. We had similar findings in our research. Our work has verified an extremely low degree of 4.0 adoption in industrial micro, small, and medium firms. And in the case where there is an adoption, the adoption is partial, never it is an integral. That's why I say that the smart factory ideal of Industry 4.0 as an integral adoption of these digital technologies into production does not seem to fit clearly to the competitive performance and the strongness of our small and medium firms. Clearly represent another ideal reality. The degrees of adoption of new digital technologies appears really in the cases we saw dispersed along the organization. There were required, there where there solve a problem. The solve a problem is a clear motivation to incorporate these technologies, and there where they improve on a specific task that is necessary to compete. So the partial character of the adoption process does not seem to be a laggard problem, really, of these cases. By contrary, in some cases, implies the development of idiosyncratic and local adaptation competence and tacit knowledge production. Okay, but this is not the reason. This is not really a reason to say that this is not a relevant phenomenon to study and to analyze, especially because it is a symptom of the productization of the information and communication paradigm, and their effects are very profound. Digitalization is growing extremely fast in our societies. Also, the pandemic has raised this effect and extension. So even if we can doubt the impact that this transformation have in industry, we cannot deny the impact in all society. For example, it's very visible the application of this technology with social ends in education, health, government, and design, just to say. But in the Argentinian industrial sector, the use of 4.0 technologies seems to be a phenomenon restricted to large firms, foreign subsidiaries of multinational corporations and services. But let me include some words, some particular global reflection about this issue that are not restricted to developing countries, and some personal thoughts. You know, Industry 4.0 seems to be the technological side of discourse of a kind of neoliberalism 4.0. Global pandemic showed the sacrality of property rights, of private property right. When you see, for example, the vaccine development process, to respect the vaccine patents are more important than people, even if an enormous part of the funding of the vaccine development is public, the property is private. Clearly those some seems right. Not even a black plague of 21st century eroded the devotion of a market-driven society values. What it must happen to expropriate patents? Nothing. Patents are sacred, are holy, are kind of untouchable. No, also we have been impelled people to be their own, to be their own boss, to entrepreneur, to home working, to consume more and more from home, to exploit a virtual consumption reality. And I said 4.0 neoliberalism because it's very clear for me that we are in a continuation of the implosion of the welfare society that emerged with the 40s paradigm, you know, and a deepening of an individualization process destroying communitary values, especially the welfare rights that emerged with the past paradigm, the 40s paradigm, you know. We have heard elsewhere that these technologies tend toward an environmentally friendly solution, and it could help to render industrial production more sustainable, for example. I think that this has little credibility in a consumption-led values world. It is a kind of an illusion, a virtual reality. For example, we're losing a lot of rights earned in the forest area, like social welfare rights or labor rights. For what? To the comfort to consume in real time at home, or friendly to the environment produce good. And also, okay, the digitalization process involves a less use of paper, for example, that's good for the environment, and also the reduce of fossil energy sources and go on. But where will go the immense computer garbage? It has a name, it is called e-waste. We live in an era that we have more personal electronic devices in a home than person living there. We have to consume it yearly and yearly and yearly. And where goes all this garbage implied in an expansion of digitalization? If you see, for example, this report of the UNO, the Global E-Waste Monitor, pointed out that the net global creation of e-waste grows 20% every 5 years in the world. So it is for sure, at least for me, that we are replacing one kind of waste and garbage for another. No, if we are promoting a digital society, which Industry 4.0 is a part of that discourse, environment reasons are not credible. Could be others, of course. No, so there is a global challenge, I think, that is to appropriate these new technologies for society. We have to appropriate these new technologies with social ends, which is clearly possible, to rebuild the welfare functions of the state and communities. It is not difficult for people to appropriate these technologies, but we cannot avoid the fact that there is a subtle tension between markets and communities. And as a closure, going back to the Latin American reality and the real focus of this session, I'm sorry, the bilateral words, the growing of digitalization into production, it is a very relevant issue to research, of course, but it becomes very necessary to take a certain critical distance from the discourse of Industry 4.0. For example, summing up, we have to see what our actual micro, small and medium firms really need of these technologies to compete, to survive, to provide what really need. The main challenge for Latin American is to protect our small and medium firms, both from this discourse that tries to sell or to promote the idea of an inevitable integral transformation of the production practices, from the power inequalities in the production chains. In doing that, we have to support the competence building processes of our small and medium firms that involve in the introduction of this partial improvement. There you see small and medium firms that change their own machinery into 4.0, introducing idiosyncratic and informal changes instead of building foreign 4.0 embedded technology in the capital goods. We had to support these firms and to strengthen a local supplier sector, mainly from the software sector, what could cooperate with the firms to transform their existing machinery of the small firms into 4.0 way. And that's all of my words that I have to share with you. And thanks to all for hearing.
Thank you, Hernan. It was a very interesting presentation also. And thank you, Marcela. I am, Hernan, can you mute your microphone because I am hearing. Okay. And thank you both and the presenters today. You raised a lot of interesting questions, but we have other questions from the audience, and I read it very fast, so you can answer them. First, Dr. Israr asked what measures we should adopt to pace the growth of industry in rural areas of countries like India, where 70% of population is residing in rural areas. Veronica says, very interesting. Thank Marcela. Here is a question regarding definition of I 4.0, a firm that has adopted just one or two technologies and not fully integrated among themselves, neither with other pre-existing technologies in the firm. It shouldn't be called if an I 4.0 adoption. I think in developing countries, technological transitions will be slow, and we will be slow, and we will need to conceptualize different types of or modes of adoption. And also, Veronica, well, I don't know if you want to raise the question, but adoption is always idiosyncratic. For instance, in Argentina, there is a development of I 1.0 for automatic delivery of gas cylinder for poor neighborhood. So people will not depend on a supplier that goes. Is this a question or is a comment? Sorry. Okay. Okay, you can read it. And I don't know if we have another other question, but if you want to answer that, and we read the others.
Yes, well, thank you for your comments and questions. And yes, for the questions, for Israel's questions, let me think. Maybe it's fundamental identify elements in which areas can be successful with implementation of Industry 4.0, because well, the reality in the rural areas is very interesting, particular, but we need to identify, and I will take the last comment to Hernan, because we need to identify if we need to use and implement the Industry 4.0, for example, in the agriculture, no? In what areas, or maybe in the agriculture, we need other thing of technologies, another thing to arrangements, organizational arrangements. So, but in the case of the Industry 4.0, we need to make an important investment in infrastructure, and in the same time required to implement that educational programs, no, training to the population, because if you make an important investment in infrastructure, but you don't have the people that you need to use these technologies, you have a problem. So we need to promote an organizational reorganization, because especially I think it's similar in India to in Latin America, in agriculture, the family organization and the small and medium-sized enterprises are very important. So it's necessary to identify forms of organizational that allow the use and implementation of technologies. And in the second question, thank you, Veronica. It's a pleasure to stay here with you. And I agree with you. I think we need to consider different degrees of use of technologies, no? And because it's not the same, usually when we talk about the Industry 4.0 in general, and the specifically technologies associated with industry. Because, for example, in the case of Mexico, we found different firms that they use some technologies associated with the Industry 4.0, but not all the technologies, no? It's not the integrated systems, and only they use some technologies. And maybe, yes, we need to identify degrees or levels to use and implement, no? Because sometimes they don't have the capabilities to adoption, so they need other kind of capabilities to use, no? And for example, in other for example, in some cases we have a problem to the infrastructure, no, with the digital internet or other things associated the same, but this is only the part, the implementation, but not the use for all the firms. So yes, I think it's very important, no, identify the levels, because that I think in Mexico we don't have firms in Industry 4.0. We have firms with use the specifically technologies, but yes, the transitions was very slow, so we need to identify, no, the different stages. And well, thank you for your comments, and thank you, Hernan, for your presentation. It's very interesting, and I think yes, we want to provoke a discussion about the Industry 4.0 for the developing countries, because maybe we need more criticisms about the discourse, no, about the Industry 4.0. So thank you for the invitation, and it's all for me. Thank you, Dario.
And no, thank you for your answer. We have another question from Veronica to Hernan. I don't know if you read it, Hernan, in the chat. And also a question from Ignacio and Pedro. The question from Pedro is for both the presenters, I think, in terms of policies. I don't know if you want to say something or not.
Thanks, Dario. Thank you for the questions, and also Marcela for your words. Regarding the question of Veronica, you said if a public platform that collect and use data could be an option to address the question of the use of the data that is generated by this kind of technology. I think that could be a solution, no, a public solution, no. We have to imagine this kind of solution, no. It could work. It could work in some cases where the data generated from production of commercial could go to a kind of pool, and this pool of data makes the data accessible to other actors. You know? It could be a democratizing way to trade the data. It's a personal view, you know. But of course, they will. It should be necessary in each value chain that the actors involved that establish agreement between them in the use of data, no, and in that case, the creation of this kind of platform, it should be restricted to those actors, no. It is very promising that we are thinking in solutions to deal with this issue because the profitability of this industry 4.0 business is about the exploitation of the data, you know? In many cases that we saw, the implementation of these new digital technologies generates data that goes nowhere, that it is not used to feed algorithms of prediction, you know? So it seems in those cases that there is a loss of all the potential of these technologies, no? So it is necessary to implement this kind of instance to improve on the performance of these new technologies. You know, it is very interesting your what you propose. Thanks, Veronica. The other comment was from Ignacio, that asked about if how I see the energy transition, which includes the necessary introduction of Industry 4.0 toward renewable energies in this process. But it is a personal view, of course. I see it very costly because the new renewable energy technologies are very expensive, and in that case, I see it very unfair because it is what Chan say. Developed countries goes to the development process using fossil technologies. Now they are changing to renewable technologies, which are very costly, you know, which also have really uncertain effects over the environment. You know, we don't really know what other potential negative effect over the environment could have these new technologies, you know. So the developing countries must adopt another step, like develop the richest countries. So that's the way that I have to see this path, you know. And the other question, I don't know if for me or for you could take the next question, Marcela.
Yes, only a comment. Pedro, maybe we need educational policies, no? Especially. I think they are very important at a technical level, but also training and with firms in the educational training and the updating in firms, and because maybe a good option is the develop schemes to public and private education. I don't know, sometimes in specifically in this kind of activities related with the engineering on TIC, maybe it's very important the communication between the firms and the educational system, but maybe it's only one idea, but you can send me an email and I will send you a bibliography or some papers about the policies. But thank you, Pedro.
I only want to add that also the word that presented Hernan is has some policy recommendations for developing countries based on the cases he developed before. And I want to, well, I think we have time for one more question if there are someone that want to ask. I have a question, but I don't know if there is someone in the audience. Sonia. Sonia has a comment. I think the impacts and complementation between the new technologies and the environment and the preservation and improvement is an interesting challenge we must face. Yes, I agree. And, well, I will raise my question. I think that Industry 4.0 discourse or is generally accompanied by a kind of recommendation or going deep on the science, technology, engineering, manufacturing capabilities, and I think that, or I perceive that like a bias, a kind of bias, because I think these are capabilities mainly based on codified knowledge and not tacit knowledge or maybe local capabilities from these countries that could be very valuable also. I don't know if you have an opinion on this comment or well, if you want to say something, I don't know.
Really, Dario, I agree. This proposal of new performance standard for the industry or manufacturing sectors seems to disregard the tacit nature of the competency building process. Tends to disregard for example, in our study, the competence building that emerged from the adaptation process is much important than the implementation itself. So this kind of idiosyncratic and tacit application, tacit knowledge application, it is very important. We have a long tradition in Latin American industry of this kind of competence building as a competitive advantage of our small surviving firms, really, that survived to the 30 or 40 years of opening of the economy and neoliberal policies. We had an industrial sector that survived, and this kind of idiosyncratic production practices are one of the major explication of the strong, I don't know, and it is kind of disregarded in this proposal of Industry 4.0. Because tacit knowledge share is performed in the face-to-face inside the factory.
Thank you for your answer. I have a question in the chat, the last question, and after that, I think we have in time, so we are in time. But there is a question from Martin to Marcela.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Yes, I think it's very important, the difference between the developing countries, not only the size of the market, I think the idiosyncratic characteristics, and for example, if we study the different sectors and industries, I think is very different. For example, in my case, I usually analyze the agribusiness sector, and in the agribusiness sector is too different with the dynamic in the automotive sector, no? Because the organizational activities, the type of jobs, work, abilities, capabilities are very different. So the implementation, in this case, for example, the implementation, the Industry 4.0 in the agriculture is less than the automotive sector. And I think it's a cultural and idiosyncratic kind, because in Mexico dominate the familiar organization in the agricultural system is different in the agribusiness system, no? But in the agricultural system, the family, because we have a special organization about the land, is too important to the use and implementation of this kind of technologies. And it's different in the automotive sector because we participate in the global value chains. We are suppliers, no, with USA manufacturing system. So the dynamic is different too between sectors, and the market of the size of market usually too. And yes, the implication from different countries, I think is a lot different. So well, I like to make surveys and interviews, the qualitative research, because I think this is important to identify these characteristics, no? So yes, it's very important.
Great, thank you, Marcela, for your answer. Well, thank you both, the presenters, Hernán and Marcela. Your expositions were very interesting. I think you raised a lot of interesting questions to think about. Lastly, before ending the session, I want to promote an event that we are organizing the next month. That is the Conferencia Libera, the third Conferencia Libera event, and it will be divided into two parts this year, but 3 online sessions first, and a kind of discussion panels at the end of the year. We hope you can accompany us in this event. And after that, I would like to thank Marcela and Hernán, and I would like to thank also the rest of the organizers of this series. We hope to see you in the third session, where Veronica Robert, Antonio Andreoni, and Fiona Treguena will discuss on policies based on this paradigm or discussion of the Industry 4.0. So I want to only thank all of you for your presentation, your question, the interesting debate, and see you on the next session. Bye bye.
See you. Bye.
See you. Thanks to all.
Bye bye. See you.
Thank you.
Bye, Sonia.
Thanks.